afternoon, everyone. I hope you've all had a wonderful week thus far. So for this lesson, we're going to be discussing figurative language and some of its components further than simply similes and metaphors. By the end of this video, you are going to be able to not only correctly define and pinpoint figurative language, but you're also going to know how to spot, determine, and identify hyperboles and paradoxes in examples and texts, along with being able to recognize nuances and meanings in words through denotation and connotation. So to begin, figurative language, and I highly encourage you jot this down in your notes, is any of the various forms of expression deviating from the normal arrangement or use of words. I know it's a little long. Which are adopted in order to give beauty variety, or force to a composition. So I know that sounds a little confusing, but we'll narrow it down a little bit. And again, I highly encourage you jot this down. So some major examples of or usages of figurative language that you probably already know are similes and metaphors. Although both are comparisons, similes use like or as to compare, such as the wind howled like a wolf. Metaphors, on the other hand, are descriptive words that are transferred to objects or actions different from that to which it is literally applicable, like the curtain of night fell upon us to describe nightfall. Figurative language seems simple, but when branching into its forms of hyperboles and paradoxes, figures of speech can get a little bit tricky. So, to begin some new forms of figurative language that you may or may not already know or have heard of, we are going to start with hyperboles. And hyperboles are figures of speech consisting in exaggerated or extravagant statement used to express strong feeling or produce a strong impression not to be taken literally. Definitely not intended to be understood literally whatsoever. You might not realize this, but you use hyperboles in daily life. For example, and you can write this down, I'm so hungry, I could eat a horse. Or, it's so hot outside, that literally everything is on fire. Both statements are exaggerations and cannot truly be taken seriously. I know I use them frequently, especially when I meet up with friends that I haven't seen in a long time. I'll tell them, it's been 400 years since I've seen you. Hyperboles are relatively easy to spot, but I know they'll take a bit of practice to fully nail. The other, possibly even more confusing form of figurative language is that of paradoxes. And I'm just going to erase this really quickly so that you guys can jot this definition down as well. So paradoxes are figures of speech, as well as the others, consisting of a conclusion, or hypothesis, contrary to what the audience is led to believe. Now, I know that definition might puzzle you a bit, so basically, paradoxes are self-contradictory statements. For instance, less is more. Or even a quote by Oscar Wilde when he said, "I can resist anything but temptation." Truly, paradoxes are easier seen in example than by definition, but I'm hoping that by working through a few examples for yourself, you'll end up gaining a good grasp on both paradoxes and hyperboles before we meet tomorrow. So I have attached 2 worksheets for you guys, one on hyperboles and one on paradoxes. I found them relatively easy to follow, but just to ensure clarity, I'll go over the directions for you both. For the worksheet on hyperboles, you are going to formulate your own hyperboles based around the phrases to the side given to you. You're going to include the phrases in extreme exaggerations. The second worksheet on paradoxes this time is probably a little bit easier, as you're circling which sentence is the paradox out of the multiple choices given to you. Bring those in to me tomorrow, and yes, we will go over the answers in class if anyone needs any help. So, for the second portion of this lesson, and I highly encourage that if you didn't get these definitions down, just go back and pause the video. We are going to discuss and kind of just introduce the topic of textual nuances or differences in meanings of words. So, a nuance is a subtle or slight variation or difference in meaning, expression, feeling, etc. between words. So, sounds pretty simple, right? To clarify though, I'll start with explaining what denotations are and how they relate. You don't have to write this down unless you want to, but I normally would want to. Denotations are basically words with their dictionary definitions. However, connotation, on the other hand, aids in nuances of words with similar meanings that are still different. Connotations identify the emotional aspects of words and can expand word meanings, which leads to nuances. For an example of a nuance, I'll say, she walked to, that's not pretty, to class. Although it's simple and easy to say just walked, we're going to replace that with shuffled. She shuffled to class. Although exaggeratingly different than the other, shuffled and walked are words with similar meanings. However, one stresses the action much more than the other. Shuffled gives more insight into how the girl is feeling on her way to class, whether it be sad, dreary, tired, whereas she could have just walked any way to class without us knowing how she did that. And although I'm just introducing this particular topic to you, we will go into more depth on it tomorrow. I just hope that gives you a little bit of insight into what nuances are before we actually do go into them in depth. And hopefully these ideas have been simple enough to grasp, but of course we will continue our discussion on figurative language and nuances tomorrow if you guys have any questions whatsoever. I will see you all then.